Terrifying secret plans setting out how London would deal with a nuke attack have been obtained by the Sun. The chilling documents lay bare the grim reality of how Londoners would face nuclear Armageddon. They include grim strategies for dealing with thousands of dead bodies, and how thousands more survivors would have to strip off and be decontaminated after becoming affected. Obtained by the Sun under Freedom of Information laws, the 4 documents, which total over 200 pages, reveal the extent of the nuclear preparations by London. The documents were authored by the London Resilience Group, which operates out of City Hall and consists of a number of groups which would spring into action to deal with the horror. The official plans reveal how after a chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear or explosive materials incident, a mass fatality coordinating group would be activated to manage the scale of death. This group would be in charge with dealing with the massive amount of victims, including with the recovery and the identification of bodies. The London Fire Brigade would become a key group with the response, with firefighters trained and equipped to enter the hot zone. They have the capability to carry out emergency mass decontamination of the public and to protect the environment, and have the specialist instruments to monitor radiation and other hazards. Wherever the attack occurs in London, it would be up to the Met to establish a cordon and keep people out, and also, disturbingly, to keep people inside and stop the spread of any contaminant. Survivors would need to be stripped naked and decontaminated in mass showers by the London Fire Brigade. Men and women would be separated, and while privacy and dignity would be considered, there would need to be a high level of compliance by those infected. Staff would be wearing nightmarish protective suits to keep them safe, and medical officers on scene would decide about sending those injured or sick enough to hospital. But bodies would begin to pile up, as the grim job of dealing with them would be complicated by the fact that they too could still be contaminated, despite being dead and even after they're washed. Internal organs, for example, could continue to pose a contamination risk to those frontline responders moving the bodies, and those bodies would require specialist storage and burial. In a mass casualty event, the NHS in London would likely become overwhelmed, and those injured would try and likely flee to hospitals and medical centres in neighbouring counties. NHS England would ensure that hospitals have access to antidotes and prophylaxis treatments, which would prevent an increase in the incidence of thyroid cancers following a nuclear attack. A survivor reception centre would be set up to coordinate the logistics of helping thousands of displaced people, including providing food and transport. The Met Office would provide nuclear plume modelling to emergency responders, while the Environment Agency would provide guidance about the disposal of contaminated waste and drainage systems. Churches and religious groups would be tasked with providing support to survivors and their loved ones at hospitals and temporary mortuary facilities. Work would also need to be done to ensure any food products that are suspected or known to be contaminated do not enter the food chain. As all these agencies get stuck into their work, London will begin to recover and adjust to a new normal.
It leaves the actual person who's making the decision just a couple minutes to decide whether to basically unleash Armageddon on the world. One country's ICBMs, right, which are these intercontinental ballistic missiles, they take about 30 minutes to travel from one side of the Earth to the other. And so if you're a country that, for example, also has ICBMs and is worried that those ICBMs are going to take yours out, you have about 15 minutes to make a decision about whether to launch before those countries' missiles arrive and start targeting yours. We can go through this kind of minute by minute, right? This 15 minutes. And this is a really critical decision period for, for example, a president or a leader of a nuclear armed country. Assuming that the attack was a complete surprise, early warning satellites would pick up the heat trails of those missiles about 1 minute after they're launched, right? It's not difficult to pick up those heat trails because rockets burn very hot. Right? And so when they're flying through the atmosphere, if you have satellites with sensors that are pointing down, they can see them. You'll see the launches pretty quickly. Then once those satellites detect those plumes, right, that come from the missiles themselves, then they'll relay those warnings to ground stations, and then you'll start to see early warning radars are picking those up as well. And, while these missiles are flying through the air, what's happening is that these satellites and these radars and these various early warning systems are all communicating with each other to try and verify, okay, is this a real launch, right? It's not a false alarm. Where is it going, right? Trying to assess the trajectory and how long is it going to take for it to arrive at its target. All of these things are talking to each other. That takes about another 2 minutes. So now we're down to like 13 minutes. That information, assuming it's verified, gets sent to the person who is in charge of coordinating a response to the attack. So the person who is coordinating that now has around 10-ish minutes to locate the president's top advisors, right? Assemble them, brief them, right? Tell them what is going on, and explain to the president what kind of response options are available, right? And the president has to make a decision. Talking and explaining what is going on, right? That is eating up very valuable seconds, right? So a lot of this time, right, from this like 8 minutes now, is being spent just on people calling each other and talking to each other and saying like, here is what's going on, you know, and the president will likely have a lot of questions, right, about how serious is this? Is this a false alarm? What's going on? We don't know. And that really leaves the president with just a couple minutes to make a decision about what they want to do, right? Maybe 2 or 3 minutes. And keep in mind, this is like the most consequential decision that any human being in the history of humanity has ever made. They have about 2 to 3 minutes to make that decision with basically zero information. Once they decide to make that decision, then the rest of that time is all going to be eaten up by actually like transmitting the launch orders, you know, the missileers put in their launch sequences and then the missiles start flying. When you sort of take all those bits and pieces of actually just like punching in the numbers and people calling each other and all this stuff, it leaves the actual person who's making the decision just a couple minutes to decide whether to basically unleash Armageddon on the world. So this is like a very significant decision that's being made with very, very little time.